Hey everybody, I'd like to read and respond to a comment. JK writes, objectively speaking, Putin is applying the old tactic of the best defense being a strong offensive move. Russia is doing exactly what every major geopolitical power does when their sphere of influence is being threatened. Same story with China. As you pointed out in many of your videos, there has been a big geopolitical power game since the Cold War ended, played via financial underground dealings, media manipulation, and any other tools imaginable. I am very worried that heads of government will lose their heads, pun intended, and lead us to nuclear annihilation. I know the Europeans are very worried about their energy needs. Also, it is quite ironic that Tucker Carlson is one of the few cool heads in media right now, as displayed in his latest videos in YouTube, and I'm no fan of him. Do a follow-up video of your thoughts, KMO. All right. Well, you didn't say please, but I'm doing it anyway. Thanks for the comment and the prompt, JK. So I did go and watch two of Tucker Carlson's videos from yesterday, and the first one was the one that had the most just straight up common sense and saying basically what I said yesterday. Hey, let's just keep our heads, keep cool, don't ratchet up the rhetoric, for the sake of posturing. And certainly don't ratchet up the rhetoric and push us towards war for the sake of scoring points on your domestic cultural enemies. Good God. I mean, if the culture war weren't already destructive enough, let's not let it push us into nuclear war. Come on. So, that brings me to Tucker Carlson. I actually took some notes. Alert the media. Oh, wait, I suppose this is the alternative media. So, according to Tucker Carlson, our priorities right now need to be as follows. Job 1, avoid nuclear war. Come on. Is there anybody who doesn't agree with that? So he played some footage, as if it was on film measured by the foot. Some tape, again, physical object, no, it's just a digital recording. He played a bit of video by Senator Mark Warren, who was talking about how a cyber attack, that if Russia attacked a facility in Ukraine with cyber warfare techniques and those, digital entities used in the attack were to get out into the world and affect something, some infrastructure in Poland or Lithuania or something, that could trigger Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which says that an attack on any member is an attack on all the members, and all the members are required to come to the defense of the member that was attacked. So what is he talking about? A cyber attack on a Ukrainian facility affecting something in another country. Well, think of when the United States and possibly Israel attacked the Iranian nuclear research program and caused their centrifuges to spin out of control and basically wreck them. They did it with an internet worm called Stuxnet. And Stuxnet escaped. It was not contained to the facility that we had targeted. It got out and it wreaked some havoc out in the world. So Senator Warner is saying, look, some cyber attack on Ukraine, which is not a NATO nation, like say they attack the power grid, the Ukrainian power grid. Well, that could affect the power in Poland. If it does that trigger Article 5? And Tucker said something very, very sensible. He said, Article 5 is not a mechanical mechanism. It is not a physical object that gets knocked over, and then there are just automatic physical repercussions that cascade out from that. It is whether or not Article 5 is triggered is a result of human decision making. And if rational human beings look at a situation where clearly there were unintended side effects to an attack on Ukraine that affected a NATO nation, it would be on us if we decided to go to nuclear war. It would be on us if we decided to escalate this situation because of Article 5. Article 5 is, as Tucker said, it's not a mechanism. It's not a physical mechanism. It is words on a piece of paper that a lot of people, many of whom are now dead, agreed to. And it is up to us to decide what it is we're going to do. There is no, the NATO Charter is not some vengeful spirit that rises up and inhabits the bodies of people in control of nuclear weapons and forces them to do things. It doesn't get into the heads and take control of the bodies of heads of state. It's not a ghost, It's words on a paper. Now, I'm not saying that they mean nothing and that the NATO alliance is made up. I mean, sure, all human institutions are made up, but come on. If it pushes us toward all-out nuclear war, not even nuclear war, if it pushes us toward just kinetic, normal conventional warfare between NATO and Russia, there's nothing about Article 5 that demands that we go to war over a cyber attack gone wrong. Particularly if it's clear that it was directed at Ukrainian infrastructure. Okay. I didn't mean to talk on that for so long. 2, and this is just, biophysical reality. We need to keep the cheap energy flowing. 40% of the natural gas used by Western Europe comes from Russia. Over half of the natural gas that Germany uses comes from Russia. That gas needs to flow through those pipelines. If, that gas is coming from Russia, Russia gets paid for it. And if your logic goes like this, Russia's economy is so underdeveloped because basically it is a petrostate. The only export that we could really curtail that would hurt Putin and his regime at all would be to curtail their ability to export hydrocarbon energy. Then that's what we have to do. But that's nuts. People in Western Europe need that hydrocarbon energy for their civilization to run. So, if the choice is we have to cut off our own foot in order to hurt Putin, well then, you just need to entertain the possibility that we do forego an opportunity to hurt Putin. And then this is the part that really blew me away. I mean, I'm not a Tucker Carlson fan. Regularly, I will see people on Twitter passing around really offensive things that Tucker Carlson has said. And, I'll click on it. It's like, yeah, that's a bad take. It's like, I wouldn't support that. But then every time I watch either Breaking Points or what's the Hill show, Rising. If I watch a segment of Rising or Breaking Points on YouTube, YouTube automatically serves up some Tucker Carlson afterwards. They say, hey, if you like that anti-establishment, hate the media, hate both sides narrative, how about some Tucker Carlson? And that what the YouTube algorithm presents to me is almost invariably something that I'm glad exists. So Tucker Carlson said in this segment, we need to protect the US dollar because the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency allows the US government to operate, sustainably with what for any other country would be unsustainable levels of debt. And that if the world stops using the US dollar as the reserve currency, then the US government will go broke and the US will be sunk. You never hear that. You never hear that on CNN, or, I haven't watched CNN in years, so I can't say what you would do and don't hear, but I don't hear that any place other than, say, Rising or Tucker Carlson. They just seem to be in this area of the media sphere where they are allowed to say things that are just not said normally, that certainly wouldn't have been said in 20th century media. So that first segment I thought was really good. And yeah, Tucker was saying the right things. Top priority, do not get drawn into nuclear war. And when you get drawn into a kinetic war with a nuclear power, you have no control over, what unintended consequences flow from your decision to meet force with force. And then just the obvious. The United States, and particularly US citizens, we have no strategic interest in Ukraine. Ukraine is on Russia's border. They have intense strategic interest, and also they are bound up historically with Ukraine. Lots of people living in Ukraine speak Russian as their primary language, and they identify as Russian. That complicates the situation in a way that we can't grok it. We can't get into that, that mentality and walk in those shoes. We don't have the ability even to draw comparisons. The closest comparison would be the United States and Canada. We both speak the same language. We both mostly derive from Britain, but there's never been a time when one country or the other, was dominant. I mean, yeah, the US clearly is dominant in terms of its population size, its economy, its culture, its military, but we haven't occupied Canada. We haven't claimed Canadian territory and shipped a lot of US citizens in, to move them into that place, to claim it culturally as well. That's never happened between the US and Canada. So even though the US and Canada is about as close as you can get, metaphorically speaking, or as an analogy to the situation between Ukraine and Russia, it doesn't capture all the historical nuances and subtleties and implications. It's just we cannot understand what the Ukraine situation means culturally for Russians, but also geopolitically and strategically, in terms of the US and NATO wanting to move US troops, US weapon systems, nuclear weapons perhaps, into Ukraine, which is right on Russia's borders. We just don't have Russia's, we don't have a stake in it like they do. There's no way we can possibly care about it as much as they do. So in the second segment, this is where I think Tucker was not as appealing to me, but this is where he starts, displaying what blue church media is saying about why me, KMO, living in Berryville, Arkansas, needs to stand behind whatever the Biden administration decides to do in order to challenge Russia and to punish Putin over this Ukraine issue. And, it was talking head after talking head of wealthy people, comfortable people saying, yes, if we shut down Russia's ability to export hydrocarbon energy, then hydrocarbon energy is going to get more expensive for everybody everywhere. And it's not just people who drive cars. If you eat food, if you wear clothes, if you live in a house that was built with things that you didn't find on that lot, then the price of fuel affects the price of everything. And if you drive a Prius, it doesn't matter. You're not excused. And he didn't say anything about Priuses. This comes from one conversation I had at a party one year where some guy was super impressed with himself for owning a SodaStream and a Prius. He thought if everybody would do what he did, which is buy a Prius and buy a SodaStream, that gets rid of the plastic soda bottles, and the gasoline problem is not an issue anymore if you drive a Prius. So he thought he was good. In terms of ecological karma, he was sitting pretty, and everybody else was damned. That made quite the impression on me. It's really difficult to imagine anybody inhabiting that particular belief. Okay, so if we do the one thing that we know is going to cause Putin pain, it's also going to cause enormous pain. It's going to cause enormous pain for people, working people who have to drive to work, people who have to go to the supermarket and buy food here in the US. It's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt people in Western Europe a lot more. And Tucker wasn't talking about that. He's talking to an American audience. So I'm talking to a mostly American audience. Although, thanks to people, say, in Ireland who watch and for the generous donations that they make. I'll stick to the welfare of American people. So Tucker showed various video clips of Democrat talking heads on the blue church media, always responding to the question of, this is going to hurt. Is it really worth it? And everybody said the same thing. It's for democracy. If you're going to stand up and defend democracy, it's going to hurt. There's going to be a cost. It has to be paid. But who's going to pay it? The questions Tucker asked were, standing up, he was responding to the quote, standing up for our values is not without cost. And he says, well, what are the values? And what do they cost? The value apparently is democracy. From my perspective, democracy is just a word. And if you really want to get into it, it could be that the reason the US system is as stable as it is, the reason that it's been able to reinvent itself several times and respond in times of crisis in a rather undemocratic fashion, say World War II, is that largely in the US, even though we genuflect at the concept of democracy, we don't really practice it very much. It's been demonstrated that the will of voters has very little impact on the types of legislation that gets passed, whereas the will and the desires and the needs of the wealthy have enormous influence over legislation getting passed. And, if I were to say to you, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a corporate oligarchy, most of you would just shrug. It's like, yeah, duh, of course. Of course the will of the voters is irrelevant. Of course the systems by which we elect officials have been complicated to the point where they completely distort the will of the voters in the whole process. To the point where it just really doesn't matter what the voters want. When it comes down to, red or blue in the general election, you pick one or the other, there's very little that's going to change. The system does what the system does, and, its primary function is to preserve its own function. It is to continue into the future. And if, the will of voters were to interfere with that, well, that could be a problem, That could be a failure mode for the US system. So one way to insulate the US system against, those types of unnecessary catastrophes is to make democracy a pantomime, to make it a concept, an abstract concept that we pay homage to, but which we don't really let get in the way of the stability and the well-organized and well-functioning operation of the grand imperial system. We just don't let democracy get in the way. Democracy in this instance is just a bullshit word that people who live very comfortable lives are offering up as a justification for why you should sacrifice more, continue to sacrifice your own security, your own well-being, your standard of living, your confidence in your ability to, hand the future off to your children and have them enjoy something that's even half as good as what you had. So in this instance, I ain't doing shit for democracy. Can't put it any plainer than that. So Tucker had one great line, I thought, after playing several clips of Team Blue talking heads talking about how, punishing Putin in the only way that's really going to hurt him is going to hurt our people as well. But it's for the good. You'll be proud to have sacrificed in order to serve democracy. And, Tucker rephrased that as, yeah, it's going to hurt, but you'll be repaid in virtue. I liked that line. That was well crafted. Cheers to, I don't think Tucker writes his own monologue, so cheers to whoever came up with that phrase. Repaid in virtue. And then the final point that I have here in my notes that Tucker made, which I think is right on, is that strong people are calm. Strong people don't need to accuse, they don't need to shout, they certainly don't need to shriek, they don't need to tell people that if you ask questions, you're a Nazi, if you ask questions or if you disagree with anything we say, you're a white supremacist. That's not how strong people who have strong convictions and strong positions, strong reasons for holding those convictions, that's not how they behave. That's how people who see that any dissent, any rational argumentation, any collective consensus making, any collective process that we all engage in together to arrive at a consensus runs the risk of arriving at a consensus other than the one they want. And so they scream, they shout, they accuse, they lecture. And when somebody is accusing and lecturing, they're demonstrating that they're coming from a place of weakness, intellectually, morally. I mean, they have power, they have money, they're not weak in that respect. That's how we're weak. And, it sucks to say you're weak, but, you got to call a spade a spade. You got to recognize the reality of your situation before you can do anything about it that makes sense. Okay, well, I thought this was going to be a 5-minute video. It's looking like a 15, 20-minute video, but so it goes. All right. Hey, apologies to the C-Realm Vault subscribers. I have not gotten a new episode out in a couple of weeks, and in that time I've put out several videos. People pay for those Vault episodes. The videos are free. I'll tell you why I put out the videos. One, I can sit down and jabber into a camera, edit the thing, get it uploaded all in about an hour. Whereas a podcast takes many hours. And posting it is a more complicated procedure. It's more intensive, it's more work intensive, and it's a process that I worked out, over a decade ago. And there are probably easier ways to do it, but I'm still doing it the old-fashioned way. I make my podcast by hand, by gum. Anyway, C-Realm Vault subscribers, I owe you, and I will not put out another video until the next episode of the C-Realm Vault podcast is posted. And it's a conversation that I recorded over a week ago, and it's taken me a week to edit the damn thing. And I'm not even cutting that much stuff out. It's just editing means, I'm checking the sound levels. If there are long pauses, I'm taking those out. If me or the guest has a false start on their, something they're trying to say, and there's a lot of unnecessary words that come out before they really find their flow, I cut out those unnecessary words. It's not that I'm changing the meaning of anything. I'm just, making it flow a little better, but it's time consuming. And, if the choice is sit down and edit a video, sit down and draw the next page of the comic, or jabber into the phone for 20 minutes, jabbering into the phone, it's the easiest thing to do, and people respond to that much more reliably. And in a much higher percentage of the people watching videos leave comments than for the podcast or the comic. And, I don't get paid a lot of money for this, so it is the feedback that keeps me going. So I very much appreciate your comments. And, for people who subscribe to the podcast, you're paying for it. You're paying money for it. You don't have to pay me in comments. I'm not saying you need to do anything differently. I'm just explaining this is why I do videos when, you're sitting there waiting for the next podcast. All right. With all that out of the way, I'll talk to you later.